It's my great privilege to have today Jack and Peter Herschend. These are brothers who are the co-owners and co-founders of Herschend Family Entertainment and Silver Dollar City. Jack and Peter, so good to have both of you with me today.
Great to be with you.
Good to be here.
Well, it used to be just Silver Dollar City, but you're now, Herschend Family Entertainment has 26 properties in 10 states. Let me just read a few of these: Showboat Branson Bell, White Rocks, Talking Rocks, White Water, Talking Rocks Cavern, Dollywood, Stone Mountain Park in Georgia is something that you also work with, Newport Aquarium. You're in San Francisco with the classic cable car sightseeing, Darien Lake Theme Park Resort in Buffalo, New York, and Elitch Gardens in Denver. So it's a lot more than just Silver Dollar City now, Herschend Family Entertainment.
We've been blessed to be able to be privileged to work out in a way and work with the men and women who really are the company.
Yeah.
That's the privilege.
We'll talk about the growth as we go further on, but let's talk about the start. Silver Dollar City. Talk about your family first and what brought you to the Branson area.
Mom and Dad, is that a good enough answer? we were kids. Jack was 18, I was 16, or at least in that range when we started coming down in the very, very late 1940s. That's when Hugo and Mary started coming down, and to make a really too long story short, Hugo and Mary, Mom and Dad, fell in love with the Ozarks, pure and simple. The Ozarks then were considerably different than they are today. As a matter of fact, where Silver Dollar City sits, electricity had just arrived 2 years before. There was no electricity, no telephones until after 1956.
And then it was a 13-party line.
Oh, it was literally a crank 'em up. If we wanted to make in that early 1950s era, if we wanted to make a call back to Wilmette, where Dad was continuing to work literally to financially support the company, we had to go into Branson, and then you'd walk up to Inez Rhodes was her name. She was the telephone operator, and you would write down on a slip of paper the number Wilmette 3630 that we wanted to call, and she would go to work on it. And maybe 10 minutes later, she would say, "Okay, I've got the connections made all the way through now." It isn't that it was primitive; it just hadn't developed.
Yeah,
That makes it primitive. Which it described water. How'd you get your water?
Well, I got it. There was a man named Mr. Brown, and Mr. Brown had two jobs in life, as far as I can tell. Mr. Brown would, in the morning, he had his flatbed truck, and he would drive out, and he was our alarm clock, and he picked up cream cans. This was before anything in terms of modern dairy. It was milk collected from farmers in 10-gallon milk cans, cream cans they called them, and these things would rattle as he went down the road. And so you would know that it was time to get up, because here goes Mr. Brown. And then Mr. Brown would turn around what Jack was talking about. Deep wells just didn't exist. There was no electricity, pardon me, to run a pump, and there was no money to drill a deep well in the first place. And deep well in our part of down around Branson, Stone County, Taney County, has to be 1,000 feet deep to get to good water. Well, that took a mighty amount of money. Bottom line, Mr. Brown brought you your water in 500-gallon tank on the back of his other truck, and you would put it in a cistern under the house, and that's what you used.
So what was the startup of Silver Dollar City like? It's a completely different Ozarks, not as many people. Certainly wasn't the place it is today.
In 1953, we discovered through seeing a sale bill at the post office that our parking lot was going up for sale. And we could just picture a Dairy Queen right in the middle of the parking lot. We had to buy the parking lot back and to discover that it was the school grounds for a town that centered around the entrance of Marble Cave. And so we were fascinated with Maris. It had another name, Marble City. Had 28 people. They had a pottery factory. They had a white oak furniture factory. A number of homes. A fellow by the name of Dr. Jones was a doctor there, and 3 justices of the peace. We never figured out why 28 people needed 3, but nevertheless, we became fascinated with rebuilding this old town. And the thought was that people came to Marble Cave if they had heart trouble or if they had babes in arms and couldn't go through the cave. At that time, you went down 505 feet and came out the same way. So it was very strenuous. So we rebuilt this old town so that people had to have something to do waiting for the folks to come out of the cave. In 1960, when Silver Dollar City opened, 4 times more people came to Silver Dollar City than had ever come to the cave. So we scratched our heads, we said we must be in the theme park business rather than the cave business.
Well, in an earlier interview I did with you a few years ago, we talked about the Wilderness Church and how you would gather employees on Sunday morning before the park opened. Well, we'll talk about that and then take us through the process of who preached in those early days.
I did more than Jack did. We started a practice then, and we still do it today. We have church services every Sunday in the Wilderness Church. Wilderness Church was one of the 6 original buildings that constituted Silver Dollar City in 1960. That's all there was. There was a parking lot. We called it Main Street, which was just simply an extension of the parking lot. And you just kind of come around from the south. It was McAfee Home, the Wilderness Church, and 2 or 3 stores, general store, and a candy shop, and a restaurant, and a blacksmith shop, and along with Slantin' Sam's old miner shack. That was it. And I would tell you that my brother Jack was the contractor, the nail driver, the plumber, and the electrician on getting the original set of buildings up. And how much did we have invested?
$18,000.
That much. And if you don't think that was all that we could scrape together, I promise you that it was. Wow. That was a magnificent sum from our standpoint then, because Marble Cave, while a good business, certainly wasn't profitable enough to make that kind of a capital investment. So we started, and from the beginning, and I would tell you that Jack and I were nominal Christians at that point. Pardon me. We were anything but sold out to the Lord. We certainly believed in God and knew a little bit about Christ, but not a whole lot. But the Wilderness Church was right, and we knew that we should have services there, and we actually did. Initially, we just did 1 service, and we would close Silver Dollar City for 30 minutes, 10 o'clock to 10:30 on Sunday morning, close it down. And we were busy, or lack of busy enough, that almost all the guests could come into the church. Church holds about 65, 70 people, brim full. And so all of our guests and all the employees, that was about 15 people then, could could come to church on Sunday morning. But what you were asking about, the kind of fun story is, we have reflected back on it. We had it was almost like itinerant preachers, like traveling preachers, only we had a different pastor every Sunday. We still do. Same identical process. As a matter of fact, a name that many in the audience will remember in the assemblies is John Wilson, Pastor Wilson, who still pastors, as far as I know, up in the St. Louis area. He was one of the first. Contacted him through the AG offices right here.
Wow.
He was one of the first itinerant pastors, and he said, yeah, I'll be happy to come down. Well, John doesn't fall into the category of the next story, because he was always there. Whenever he said he would be there, he would be there. And most of the pastors certainly were. But from time to time, we would have a situation. It would be 9:45, and whoever was supposed to be there wasn't there, and then it would be 5 of, and Jack and I would stand outside the church and have this, we'd have our prayer meeting. And we would, Jack had evolved a great system as to who got to preach that day, remembering we'd had 30 seconds to prepare at that point. And so we flipped a coin, and heads, I preach, and tails, you preach, sort of thing. And the other guy would ring the bell. Much easier job. I do believe he had a two-headed coin. I always ended up, and you know, that's for two guys who were not well versed in Scripture, either one of us to stand up there and go through wasn't a great teaching.
It was painful.
Painful to the audience, and certainly painful to us. But we did it, and good memories though. We still, the services are still held. We obviously can't get everybody in the church. Busy days on Sundays.
Right.
The city stays in operation, but there'll be a service early for employees, really before things get underway, and then one and oftentimes two services on Sunday morning for guests, and they are, if sold out is the right term, they are sold out services.
Amen. Well, you said you were nominal Christians. That changed for both of you, which I'll talk to you in your individual interviews about. But something else that changed over the years was your relationship as brothers. You grew closer together. Could you talk about that?
I'm embarrassed to think about what kind of a brother I was as we were growing up. I looked at Pete really as a slave. He would do whatever Jack said, and he would be very cheerful about it. But you describe it well. As we grew up together, and then got in business together, we just had a great respect for the giftedness of the other, and we are so different. Pete has been called, and I think accurately, a marketing genius. He's one of a few handful in the United States that are really good at marketing, and that was his giftedness. Mine was more in the operational end, but the point is we had a great respect for each other. Everybody has heard how difficult it is to be in a family business, and that's true, because you're dealing with business issues and you're also dealing with family issues. Pete and I just have not had a problem because of the respect that we have for each other.
Yeah.
We've been partners for 60 years.
Wow.
And that's a good track record.
It is.
And I'm proud of it.
It is.
And you can tell we are physically a lot
Very
alike.
alike.
Yeah.
Speak alike.
By the way, the reason I would do whatever he said was he was bigger than I was at that time.
Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, for those days back again.
Yeah. But I was kind of a scrawny little guy, and And Jack was, 2 years older, so he knew everything, and
Wow.
he made sure I knew that he knew everything. I've managed to outgrow him, gotten an inch or two of height on him, but we remain partners and best friends.
Talk about your core values. I know that's something very important with Silver Dollar City and your businesses.
Ken, I believe core values again start with Jesus Christ. It was like a meal. A meal is better because of seasoning, but if you put a little too much seasoning in, it spoils the whole meal. A core value for us, as we've talked about, is a tasteful witness. Like that meal, we hope that we can season our lives tastefully so that people understand what we believe and they can see it, because they can see it and we don't have to preach it. And so a core value for us is keeping Christ at the center of our business. Another one for me is the flag, and we do a flag raising every morning, and it's an emotional time when we ask veterans to come and be a part of flag raising. And so a core value in our business is to be grateful that we're Americans and be proud of it. Our vision statement says that we best serve the Lord by bringing families together. And so we're very, very conscious of every opportunity we have for the family to have a great time together, and that the family is the hero, not Silver Dollar City,
Wow.
but the family. So those are some of the core things. One other one I guess I'd like to add is the honoring the folks that make up the Silver Dollar City family, or now an HFE family, and we honor them best by making sure that they're listened to, making sure that they feel valued, making sure that when there's a decision that needs to be made and it's going to affect them, that they get a chance to speak into it. And so the value, the core value of employees being valued is a big part of our core system, value system.
And I've been going to Silver Dollar City, well, even before I moved here. I went to Silver Dollar City, and I'm along with all the many others who realize it just seems to be different from any other place on earth. It's a different sort of theme park, and this tasteful witness, you do hear people, employees talking tastefully about their relationship with Christ. I've had the opportunity to interact with employees, and there is just something special about Silver Dollar City, probably because of your core values.
I think that's right. There's another, Jack and I had a discussion just, not last week, week before last, about what we call the heart and soul of Silver. We're talking Silver Dollar City here, but it applies to the whole company. We have
all your
10,000 men, women who are part of the family, and hopefully that heart and soul, that uniqueness that is reflected. Jack ticks off the things that are really right. Honoring God, honoring Christ as our Savior, without going to church. We are in the entertainment business.
Yeah.
We are not in the business of church. But if we do it right, or at least strive to do it right, I don't think we ever get it right, but we strive to get there, then you and hopefully thousands and thousands of families like yours will sense that heart and soul that is different.
Yes.
It is not a matter of saying we are better than somebody else. That isn't the case at all. We're not. You know,
Right.
name what gets your attention, but that heart and soul, which is the freedom of our men and women to talk about Christ when it's appropriate. It is the freedom to have church services.
Yeah.
Those are all part of the core values. And if you read our mission statement, it says create memories worth repeating. And then we have a series of core values that drive that. But the last statement on one page is all in a manner consistent with Christian values and
Yes.
ethics.
Thank you.
All of it.
All of it.
And you got to do it that way. You can't just say, well, we do a lot.
Yeah.
It's got to be the heart and soul.
That's powerful to do
That's well said.
everything with that in mind,
Yep.
consistent with Christian values. And you've got a lot of friends in the Assemblies of God, a lot of people who love Silver Dollar City, would just as soon go there as anywhere for good family time, and it's a good, healthy place to be. One thing that kind of illustrated not just that about Silver Dollar City, but sort of your philosophy overall was, I guess it was a couple of years ago that Joel Manby, your CEO of
Corporate
Herschend,
CEO.
corporate CEO of Herschend Family Entertainment, was on the program Undercover Boss, which revealed some pretty interesting things about Silver Dollar City to people who didn't know them. Could you talk about that?
I'm in shock that CBS left the Christian values in the segment.
Yeah.
That was just a total surprise. There was an external plus to Joel's being on Undercover Boss, and an internal one. The external was just that 17 million people saw the show, and there was something different because Joel is a committed Christian and a very dynamic leader, and that came through to 17 million people. That was pretty neat.
Yeah.
But the internal value, not many people know about. Joel got the opportunity to really rub shoulders with the folks that make it happen, and whether it was washing down streets or it was a waitress on the showboat, he got a chance to really know them. We had a program, not very old at that time, called Share It Forward, and it's a program where employees donate money, and like $1, and then the company matches that dollar, and the shareholders match it, so that the employee knows that his or her dollar is really going to have $3 impact on whoever has need, whether it's a house that burned down or it's a child that's sick, whatever. And Joel, when he had a chance to really understand the lives of the people that make it happen, the real folks that make HFE hum, he said, we don't do enough in Share It Forward. And he got on a campaign internally to really bring that to a level that it never would have got, I don't believe, had he not been on Undercover Boss.
Yeah. And that program also, we saw it, and it also said some pretty good things about Silver Dollar City and about what you're going there.
Tell you a story. Again, it's an internal fallout of the story. It was great publicity. You know, it was second most highly watched Undercover Boss on record.
Wow.
Sidebar, we saw that show for the first time when you saw it.
Oh, is that right?
We did not have editorial control on the show.
Yeah.
Now, Joel could have quit, you know,
Yeah.
if he'd seen them starting to
Yeah.
swear or just do things that were inappropriate. He could have stopped and walked, and the show wouldn't have happened. That didn't happen.
Yeah.
And the producers weren't going to allow that to happen. But we saw it. We had we didn't get to say use that scene and not that scene.
Wow.
So we were sitting there with a little bit of white knuckle time
Some
before it
trepidation.
went on. But the thing, Jack mentioned the street washing. That was, you may remember, there was one scene where he was learning how to
right.
wash the streets. We wash
Yeah.
the streets every night in
Yeah.
Silver Dollar City. Well, in all of the park properties, they all have that. And he got to know Richard. And Richard was living with his 3 children and 2 adopted children.
Yes, I remember this.
And is in a pop-up trailer because their house over by Galena, Missouri had been flooded away. And then they finally moved into another house, but that house was not much bigger than this studio area that we're sitting in. And Joel was so touched by this, personally touched, that he did 2 things. He had asked Richard, why Richard, why didn't you apply to share it forward for funding? Because that's exactly what the fund exists for. And Richard's answer was classic. He said, well, no, that's for folks who really, really need it.
Yeah.
Well, any employee, Jack, could make an application to the fund on your behalf. Yeah. If he knew a need you had, and just see to it it's taken care of. And Joel did exactly that on Richard's behalf. The fund, by the way, is not controlled by management. Joel had to apply. I would have to apply on your behalf. It isn't. Ownership management has the committee that handles it.
Gotcha.
Is not made up of us. And long story short, was able to put new windows and doors in Richard's house. Wow. Because the wind was blowing through. And then came back a second time and added a second bathroom in this house, which had only one with 7 folks living in. And the company guys, our maintenance and construction guys went over and did all the work and got it done. But that's an internal sidebar of the story. Along with, as long as I'm on that, he was so touched, and I remember her name is Mercedes, who was a cleaning gal in our aquarium just outside of Philadelphia in Camden, New Jersey. And if you'll remember in the show, she was saying to Joel, you got to put more elbow grease into cleaning. Joel's up there, as hard as he can. Single mom, working hard, wanting to get ahead, but she said it's really, really hard. And so Joel established inside the company a fund for single moms whose income level is below the poverty. How they determined that is, but it was not sufficient to get by. And so for any single mom, it would apply to a single dad too. And there just aren't as many floating around whose income level was low. They get an income supplement per month on an annual basis. You don't get it forever until they can get themselves pulled up by their bootstraps or their life financially changes. All that came from the show.
Yeah.
And one of the side things that I think is neat, his staff there in his office insists that a bottle of Windex stays on his desk in order to remind him. There are people out there doing all the stuff that needs to be done to make HFE successful.
Yeah, it's hard to remember because you do get tied up in.
Sure.
You go, if you're at Joel's level, you go meeting after meeting, negotiations, and you don't get to work with Richard. You don't get to work with Mercedes. So you do need remember.
Helps us
reminding.
all to get to the grassroots every once in a while.
Get grounded, right?
Yeah. Just one story that I recall from our talking before. This extends to the employees. You see employees of Herschend Family Entertainment doing great things for other people. You shared about an employee at Dollywood, I believe it is. There was a family whose car wouldn't start. Remember that story?
Oh yeah.
Would you share that?
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. This is half a dozen or so years ago, but the story just I hope it is reflective of who we always are. Late in the evening, we've all seen it when the parking lot is essentially empty. The parks are closed, and everybody's gone. And one of our guys who worked in the automotive shop, we have to have a repair shop that keeps the vehicles running, was leaving work. He'd finished his work for the day, and he was cutting across the parking lot, getting back out to the road to go home. And in the parking lot, there sits a car. And here were the clues. The hood was up and the trunk was up, and there were 4 people standing around the car staring at it.
Yeah.
And this at 10 o'clock at night, that is not a good sign. You figure out something's wrong. So he just swung his car over there and said, "You folks having a problem," or words to that effect. And they said, "Yeah, the starter doesn't seem to want to start the car." And he's a mechanic, so he climbed out of his car and said, "Well, let me take a look." Climbed out, tried it, the key, and sure enough, it wouldn't start. And he looked at their car and he looked at his car and he said, "Okay, I'll be back in about 5 minutes." Well, they aren't going to go anywhere because their car isn't going to start. 5 minutes later, he came back. They had no idea what he was even talking about. And without a word, he gets his toolbox out of his car, climbs under his car, takes the starter off his car, same brand cars. You know, they were both General Motors or Chrysler or whatever they were. Takes the starter off of his car, climbs under their car, takes the starter off of their car, tosses it in his trunk, puts his starter on their car, gets up in the driver's seat, tries the ignition, sure enough, the car starts.
Yeah.
They said, you guys are good to go.
Yeah.
And they said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "My wife's coming down. She'll get me. I know how to fix the starter."
It's a great story.
And they went on there. We didn't know about it.
He didn't tell you about that.
He didn't tell us about it. They had to write us, and it took some figuring out on management's part
who it was.
Who in the world had done all this. True story.
Yeah, yeah. And it says an awful lot. Well, one thing I want to ask as we close is, what would you say to a Christian who's starting a business today? And as we talked about this before going on the air, I just found out that Joel Manby has a new book coming out, so maybe you could mention that. But then would you address this? What would you say to Christians who are either starting a business or working in their own business today as to what they should do?
First of all, it'd be get the right people on that bus with them in that business. To be evenly yoked makes sense in a business as well. Now, at some point in your growth, it's good to have folks that are not believers in your business as well, because it's an opportunity to witness.
Exactly.
But as you get started, to have evenly yoked folks with you is a really, really important part of getting started. You mentioned Joel having written a book, and the title is Love Works, and it's his description of how you apply 1 Corinthians 13 to the marketplace. And he talks about patient and what that means, and what it means to be kind, and that he talks about being an awesome listener, and that's a part of kindness, is to treat people with respect. He talks about forgiveness, and within our organization, we celebrate mistakes. Now, not with parties, but we say, you know, the only thing we require, having made a mistake, is that we learn from it. What did we learn so that we're smarter the next time around? And it all fits within 1 Corinthians 13, and Joel does a masterful job of describing. So coming back to that Christian just getting started in business, get the book, Love Works, because the principles that have been learned over 60 years are really represented clearly, crisply, in a very helpful way in his book.
Love Works by Joel Manby.
Love Works by Joel
I
Manby.
think it's out in May
May or June.
May,
May or
June. Yeah. So I can guarantee you we'll have it at Silver Dollar
You'll
City.
have it at Silver Dollar
Yeah.
City.
And as an aside, this just tells you something about the quality of the man. All of the proceeds that come from the book, whatever that is, will all go to Share It Forward.
I'll go share it for it. Wow, that does say an awful lot. Still, after all these years, still having fun, still enjoying what you're doing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. What we do today is different than what we did 60 years ago.
Uh-huh.
You know, we both walked around with hammers in our back pockets 60 years ago, and Jack won't let me do that now. And the safety people won't let me do that now. But yeah, it's a joy. And the day it becomes not enjoyable is the day that I ought to retire.
Yeah. Well, thank you both very much. It's been great to talk to you about this wonderful thing that God has done in the entertainment industry. I think it says a lot to know that God can be in the middle of entertainment.
Well said.
It's very, very good. So my guests today have been Jack and Peter Herschend, the co-founders and co-owners of Silver Dollar City and of Herschend Family Entertainment.